welcome into the Weather Wednesday podcast here at New England Storm Center. So, of course, the big weather story of this past week was the tornado outbreak down south, and in particular the EF4 tornado that tore a path through Mississippi. And when this tornado was actually occurring, when it was on the ground, I was watching live coverage of it when we were in the tornado emergency for this particular tornado. Um, Two maps really stood out to me while that tornado was ongoing. That was the wind velocity and the correlation coefficient, and those are the two maps that you're seeing now. And these two maps really stood out to me. It stood out to a lot of people that this makes it very clear that there was a tornado on the ground, not only a tornado confirmed on the ground, but a very strong tornado on the ground. You can see the wind velocity really packed in there. Of course, the reds and the greens basically showing wind direction going in the opposite of each other, and you can see very tight, compact circulation in there. And the correlation coefficient, which basically shows a debris field, it shows a cloud of debris, you can see very clearly. I mean, if you ask anyone, if you show anyone a picture of this map and you say, where do you think the tornado is? They're going to point right there at that debris field. Big cloud of debris flying around, a lot of damage being shown there. Of course, the tornado hit overnight, but when day broke, we were able to confirm visually that it was a very devastating tornado that tore through Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and the surrounding communities. A lot of devastation. There was unfortunately a lot of death with this tornado. And it overnight. When I was watching the live coverage, at night you can't see much, but you could see that there was some panic, clearly some damage going on. But when that sun came up and we saw the full scope of devastation, we knew that was a very bad tornado. The National Weather Service, of course, confirming that it was an EF4 tornado that tore through Rolling Fork and the surrounding communities. So a very devastating situation down there. And again, unfortunately, there was a lot of death with this tornado. There was over 20 deaths associated with this tornado. So my heart really goes out to those folks down there in the South, in Mississippi and surrounding states and communities down there that have got hammered by this 4-day tornado outbreak. It's been a very busy, severe season because it was so mild throughout the winter down there that they've just had severe weather ongoing, and it's already been a destructive season. And we're coming up to the peak of tornado. I was going to say tornado season. I know there really isn't a tornado season. Tornadoes happen year round, but the peak of tornado activity typically comes to the United States in April, and we're coming up to that, and it's already been destructive, and unfortunately there will very likely be more outbreaks over the coming weeks. So staying with the subject of destructive storms, there have been a couple of changes to the upcoming hurricane season that the National Hurricane Center is implementing along with the World Meteorological Society. So we'll go over those couple changes, and they did not make a change, something staying the same that I'd like to talk about. But these changes, they are now going to be producing extended outlooks up to 7 days. Previously, they went out 5 days. So they are now going to, the outlooks are now going to cover a full week now. The list that's being used was last used in 2017. There will be 4 new names on this list: Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Nate from 2017 were all retired, so those names are being replaced. I'll put those up on the new names up on the screen now. So those are the big changes. Not too much by way of changes there, but the one thing that they did not change that has been swirling in the meteorological discussion over the last few years is, should the hurricane season be bumped forward a little. Right now, the official hurricane season is June 1st to November 30th. There's been talks about pushing it up a couple weeks. May 15th comes to mind. Maybe make it May 15th to November 30th. It was decided not to do that. They are sticking with June 1st to November 30th for the foreseeable future. And I understand why. I realize, we've had multiple years recently where we've had tropical cyclone development in May, and particularly into late May. So, May 15th, maybe start the season. But I see why they didn't, and that's because there's still 96% of all tropical activity occurs from June 1st to November 30th, and it would really be 1% or less of tropical cyclones would be covered in the expansion of the hurricane season, making it in that time frame from May 15th to May 31st. There's just not enough tropical activity to justify moving the date up that much further, because in the end, tropical cyclones have formed every single month of the year. All 12 months of the year have seen tropical development, and again, 96% of that development comes from June through November. So I completely understand why they will be sticking with June 1st instead of moving it up to. I was thinking maybe they would move it up to May 15th, but the more I've thought about it, I think it does make sense to just keep it starting at June 1st, because there's that 2-week span in May. There's just not enough tropical cyclone activity to justify moving it up, like I said. And like I said, tropical activity has happened all 12 months of the year. So if you want to truly make sure that all 100% of tropical cyclones are covered in the season, it would be January 1st to December 31st. So again, I think June 1st to November 30th. I completely understand why they're sticking with that, and I think that is the right decision on their part. So coming back to New England weather now, we do have a storm coming in for this weekend. This is going to be an all-rain storm for most of New England, and it will be mostly rain for all of New England. I hope that makes sense. Some northern areas, higher elevations, they might start as snow in a mix, but everyone in New England is going to switch to plain rain by Saturday with this storm. So a good old-fashioned spring rainstorm now. We've already had our spring snowstorms. Now it's time for the spring rainstorm. This rainstorm, it could produce some flooding in northern New England, mainly from there could be a widespread 1/4 to a 1/2 an inch, and areas of northern New England that still have a very healthy snowpack from the nor'easter that we had a couple weeks ago, dropping 3+ feet of snow. That snow melt combined with the rainfall could lead to some minor flooding. At this point, a major flood event certainly not anticipated, but some minor flooding could happen. Otter Creek, there are model guidance as I'm recording this right now, have shown a 75% chance of Otter Creek in Vermont reaching at least minor flood stage. Now that's a pretty high number for being several days out, 75%. And as the National Weather Service of Burlington noted, that likelihood is going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down as more guidance comes in as we get closer to the weekend event. But yeah, mainly Vermont is looking at some minor flooding. New Hampshire might as well, but again, as of right now, it's looking like it's going to be a more minor flooding event. So speaking of snowpack and snow melt, we are going to move on to the. I'm trying to do smooth segues through this episode. We're covering four subjects, which is more than I usually end up doing on Weather Wednesday. But I'm trying to do these smooth segues, and it's just not panning out. But anyway, so I'm just going to say we're moving on to an update on the resort roundup now. So it was actually a pretty quiet week for ski resort closures in New England. I have two to report from this past weekend. Closed Crotched Mountain in New Hampshire and Saskadena in Vermont. Both had their final weekends this past weekend. Blue Hill ski area, they were in assess mode for this week and they did not open for this weekend. So the past weekend, March 19th, was their last day. And Crotched and Saskadena, they both closed for the season on March 26th. So only two closures to report here on the last Sunday in March. Just for a comparison and just how much this late season nor'easter really helped the ski resorts. Last year, the last Sunday in March, there were 11 closures across New England for the last weekend in March, as I said. There were 11 ski resorts closed this same weekend versus just two this year. So that mid-March nor'easter, that pounding of snow that we got in mid-March really helped the resorts. And what was otherwise looking like it was like 90% of this season was pretty bleak for the ski resorts. Hardships, warm temperatures, not much snow. Not a lot of sleet, a lot of freezing rain, a lot of mixing going on. But bam, mid-March, 3+ feet of snow across some areas, 2+ feet in pretty much all the major resorts in northern New England. So big help there, helping these resorts stay open with this weekend rainstorm. And I know looks like there's warmer days ahead next week. So the closures will likely be accelerating very, very soon. But for now, it's been slow. Like I said, 35 of the 42 resorts that we're monitoring are still open. They're either confirmed to be open or they're in assess mode where they're going to look at their conditions this upcoming weekend and decide if they can reopen or not. So that is the Resort Roundup. You do not have to wait until Wednesday to hear the Resort Roundup update. I post the Resort Roundup update on NewEnglandStormCenter.com on Mondays. Just go to NewEnglandStormCenter.com, click on the Resort Roundup tab, and you can see the update on Monday. You can also see a map of all the resorts that are still open. So, with all of that said, that is going to do it for this edition of the Weather Wednesday podcast. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Keep it right here. Keep it at NewEnglandStormCenter.com, and you will hear from me again next Wednesday.